yet another packed Deck news roundup. There's good news for Steam Deck availability, plus January has been a stacked month for video games. The biggest of those launches had really bad Steam Deck issues, but thankfully Valve fixed it themselves in like a matter of a day. Also, there's a leak for a really big Sony trilogy coming to Steam, but it's most likely fake. Not to mention we have some huge JSAUX updates, so with all that, let's get into it. Oh yeah, hit the like and subscribe to help this video spread to more people. Let's go! I'll start with that first story about availability. This one might be bigger than you think. Valve tweeted from their On Deck account saying that the reservation system is no longer in place for Steam Decks in Asia, the one exception being 64GB Steam Decks in Japan. Outside of that small exception, Komodo is fully stocked for all three models in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. There's an outside chance that this is actually a bigger deal than it seems and a sign of some bigger news coming soon. Back on July 29th, Valve announced that everyone who had a reservation in the original 4 regions would be able to order their Steam Deck by the end of the year. Then less than a week later, Valve announced that Steam Decks were coming to new regions. I kinda want to temper my excitement this time around, but if Valve is able to get through reservations, that seems to once again imply that they're able to accept some new demand. I would expect that demand to come in the form of another new region, this time that region being Australia. But just because they're able to accept new demand doesn't mean they necessarily have the logistics part buttoned up. Last time their distributor Komodo was ready to go, but do they have a deal in place for any new regions? How are they going to structure it this time around? I do know one thing though, if we don't hear about Australia soon, there might just be a riot. Next, let's jump into this month of video games. It has been way more stacked than expected, and one game I've been dying to talk about is Hi-Fi Rush. As you know, this game shadow dropped last week to amazing reception, and on top of that, it plays great on Steam Deck. If you somehow missed it, this is the rhythm combat game from Tango Gameworks, the developers behind The Evil Within and Ghostwire Tokyo. I do have one quick complaint. I was actually recording some B-roll for my Aya Neo 2 review coming soon when I happened to pick this up. I really wanted to capture this game on the beautiful Aya Neo 2 screen, so I fired it up on the Neo 2 and on the Air Pro to get a comparison shot, and that's when I realized the graphics settings are stored in Steam Cloud. Please do not do this, developers. There's no reason to keep graphics settings in the cloud, and as my friend Mosquito pointed out, Valve actually advises against it in their developer documentation. Right in the second paragraph on the Steam Cloud page, they say avoid machine-specific configurations such as video settings. So yeah, please don't do this because it actually removes convenience. If I'm often switching between my desktop and my deck, then I have to switch graphical settings each time I change machines. Anyway, aside from that small complaint, this game is phenomenal. Obviously, some people were surprised to see such a departure from the horror games that Shinji Mikami and therefore Tango Gameworks is known for. The through line most people think of when they think of Shinji Mikami is Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, then Resident Evil 4, then The Evil Within 1 and 2, followed by Ghostwire Tokyo. But this neglects like half of Mikami's career, which includes Dino Crisis, Vanquish, Piano 3, and frickin' God Hand. This dude and the people that have worked with him over the years are masters at making games in all genres, and even the relative duds like Ghostwire Tokyo have extremely redeeming qualities. It turns out, by the way, that this game was in development well before Microsoft entered the picture, but I'm glad that Microsoft continued to support this passion project, and it's something I hope to see more of at Microsoft. I think it's safe to say that it pays dividends to support developers making the games they want to make and not just what they've been pigeonholed to create. One more thing that has popped up from the release of this title is discourse around whether or not shadow drops are a good thing, or whether or not more games should release out of the blue with no marketing like a Beyonce album. I think that like anything else, there's a lot of nuance here and there's no advice that can universally apply to every game, but this is certainly a good tool for publishers to keep in the toolbox. I think for Hi-Fi Rush in particular, there was a bit of a perfect storm where there was a small gap in the release schedule, it's relatively dry as far as gaming news goes, and lots of people were tuned into the Xbox Developer Direct and primed to be excited about something new on the horizon. Not only that, but the game was great and well priced, and honestly probably didn't benefit from people's expectations forming before they had a chance to play the game. All of this led to a situation where people would be happy to hop on Game Pass or even drop $30 to see if this game is for them, especially in a season where Xbox gamers were anxiously awaiting exclusives or Game Pass holders were looking for something new to turn to. All of that to say, more shadow drops would be great, but it's not going to work for everyone. What do you think, and what do you think of Hi-Fi Rush? Let me know in the comments. GoldenEye 007 Remastered also dropped last week to Switch and Xbox, and I really wanted to play this on Steam Deck with mouse controls, better textures, the whole nine. So that's just what I did over the weekend. I turned to this project called 1964 GEPD. Shout out to Grassloo, who appears to be the owner and maintainer of this project, and even has really good written and video guides that I will link in the description. Anyway, this project is an emulator specific to GoldenEye 007 and Perfect Dark, and it adds mouse injection so that you can control the game with your mouse. Since this adds mouse control, that also means that you can use the Steam Deck trackpads or gyro, or even use the best aiming method of all, flick stick. In addition to mouse control, this emulator adds an overclock feature that allows you to go up to a smooth 60 FPS, and I'm not here to bash the emulation for this game on the Switch, but basically this is a better version of GoldenEye Remastered, and you can use it to play Perfect Dark as well. The Steam Deck setup instructions were super simple, so I gave it a try. Just download the latest release, unzip it somewhere like desktop or /home/applications, put your ROMs in there too. Only NTSC ROMs will work for now. One more note about the ROMs is that they can't have spaces in the names. I renamed GoldenEye to GE.Z64 and Perfect Dark to PD.Z64. Once you have the ROMs in place, add 1964.exe to Steam as a non-Steam application. You'll want to set the launch options to what you see on screen. That launches the 1964 emulator with GoldenEye and sets the overclock to 6, which is the right overclock for this game. The instructions are a little bit different for Perfect Dark, so make sure you take a careful look at that. Then rename the game to GoldenEye 007 so you can find the right community layouts and set the Proton to Proton Experimental. Of course, you can grab artwork from Steam Grid DB, but from here I went right into gaming mode, launched the game, and found the community layout from Grassloo and started playing. Honestly, this is pretty sick, and I'm excited to run through these games again, maybe with mods this time. Grassloo actually has a playlist of custom levels he recommends, so I will have to check that out. And yeah, I'll configure a flick stick setup so I can really play this the way I want to play it. Outside of that, it's been hard to keep up with all the great releases. Obviously, Forspoken had mixed reviews, but I still really want to try it for myself. Oh, I did get to play two of my most anticipated indies, and they both delivered, so I really want to give those a quick shout out here. If you like Wario Land 4, chances are you're going to love Pizza Tower. This game is phenomenal. There are so many layered movement mechanics that it's going to be a blast to speed through levels. Similarly, if you're a fan of Shinobi 3, you're going to love Vengeful Guardian Moonrider. It's on the short side, but it has a ton of replay value thanks to secrets, multiple paths, and the grades at the end of each level. One game I learned about that I didn't get a chance to try yet is Candria. Somehow this game seems to have top tier platforming, top tier combat, and maybe some good fishing too. Definitely check out these games, but if you can't afford to pick up full price games right now, then check out this Humble Bundle. This has 7 games from 2022, and I can personally recommend 4 of them with Zero Sievert, Superland 6 Inches Under, Power Slave Exhumed, and Haiku the Robot. This is an awesome collection for just $23. I'm including my affiliate link if you want to help the channel out, but as always with Humble, you can just choose where the money goes. Oh, and just for fun, here are codes to an awesome indie game called Jet Cave Adventures that I covered a while ago. Grab them while you can, but if you miss it, it's currently at 70% off on Steam. Then there's probably the biggest release of January, and that's the highly anticipated remake for Dead Space. I could feel all of our collective sigh of relief as the embargo lifted and the reception for this game turned out to be great. And this brings me to something I've been trying to tell y'all for like a year now. EA is pretty good actually. Listen, if we're gonna tear down EA and other companies when they suck, we also have to give them credit when credit is due. EA certainly still have strides they need to make when it comes to their sports games and even multiplayer games like Battlefield 2042, which by the way, they seem to be really improving. But the point is that even though they do have strides to make, they have been really consistent at making great single player games for the past few years. I'm happy to see that this sentiment is starting to gain traction with others too. I saw John Linneman from Digital Foundry and later SkillUp tweet about this. Of course, that doesn't mean that Dead Space had no issues. Most notably, it had really bad Steam Deck compatibility with like 4 major issues on day one. The first issue is that this game was designed specifically for an SSD, and it warns you about that in the beginning. So this isn't a game you should install on your SD card. That's not a huge deal, but it's good to keep in mind when you go to install it, and it does hurt the users with the 64GB model. For what it's worth, I do expect to see more games like this as we get into the full swing of the PS5 and Xbox Series generation. But in addition to that, there was a ton of severe stuttering. This is related to shader compilation, but it was even more severe than other big games usually are on day one. That was especially annoying because when you first boot the game, it tells you it's building shaders, and this leads to a long initial load, so it leaves you to wonder what was it actually doing during that time. There was another issue where variable rate shading was being ignored, which was making performance even worse, albeit slightly, and finally the game would crash altogether when looking at the map. These latter three issues, the shader stutter, the rate shading bug, and the map crash, made the game effectively unplayable on deck. What was interesting about this is that Valve acted incredibly quickly and fixed all three of these issues by themselves. Pierre Liu from Valve tweeted a few times over the next day to give us the updates on the fixes. He first tweeted about an initial set of precompiled shaders being added. This tweet, by the way, was made at midnight local time, so clearly they were working on this late into launch day. Also in this tweet, he said that the map crash issue was still being investigated, but then less than 9 hours later, he followed up and said there was a Proton hotfix that addressed the map issue as well as the variable rate shading issue. I just found it funny that this game launched in such a poor state for the Steam Deck, but all the biggest problems were fixed so fast by Valve that some people didn't even get to the game fast enough to have a bad experience in the first place. Here's a tweet from Mudahar, aka Some Ordinary Gamers, where he says, quote, "God, I can't believe how well Dead Space is running on the deck right out of the gate. Great game, we'll probably make a video on it when I beat it," end quote. I'm glad that Valve is able to support their platform like this, but if they're able to make fixes this quickly, it seems to imply that all of this could have been avoided if Valve was involved at an earlier stage, like they were with Monster Hunter Rise and Elden Ring. This seems to be a pattern with EA. I opened this segment by praising EA, but it seems like Steam Deck compatibility is not particularly important to them, and I'd really like to see that change. Steam Deck has really strong support and cooperation from publishers like Sony and Capcom, and I don't really see why EA is not keen to maintain deck compatibility in their games. You know, all of this had me thinking if day one performance reviews are really worth the trouble, and I spoke to two people that do a great job of actually doing the hard work with day one performance reviews. First, I spoke to Liam from Gaming on Linux, and he said that this work is very important for two reasons. Number one, when you think about any other system that has a game available, do people, or should people, really have to wait days or even weeks for that game to become playable? Of course not. And number two, it serves as an indicator for progress. I also spoke with Noah from SteamDeckHQ.com, and he had similar thoughts, but one thing he said that really resonated with me is that people doing these reviews have to be cautious when claiming best settings or definitive performance early in a game's launch, because titles like Dead Space are showing us that many games, especially big ones, are heavily subject to change when it comes to performance in the first few days. I agree with everything Liam and Noah said, and I think it's important to recognize the hard work they're doing to get out these performance reviews and then adjust them as needed as the situation changes. So a huge shout out to Gaming on Linux and Steam Deck HQ for being so consistently hardworking. Next up, we have a short story about the next supposed leak from Sony PC ports. There were 3 new entries on SteamDB that appeared to indicate that Sony was planning to port the original Little Big Planet trilogy to PC. The rumors got picked up by major news sites, and the developer of SteamDB ended up issuing a warning that these entries are very likely to be fake. He's obviously had a lot of experience with data mining entries like this, so I think it's safe to say that he's absolutely right. In addition to that, there are some practical reasons that this is all unlikely to be true. Sackboy didn't sell particularly well on PC, and it seems very unlikely that they would risk going through that all again for this trio of games. Not to mention, Sony hasn't been very keen on porting PS3 games, and if they were, I would imagine they would start with something like the Uncharted trilogy. Finally, all of the Little Big Planet servers were already shut down nearly 2 years ago after Sony was dealing with hackers and malicious actors. So yeah, I don't think we can expect Little Big Planet on deck anytime soon. Besides, they should port Dreams instead. Speaking of Sony released their Pro controller, the DualSense Edge, and there were many questions about its compatibility for PC and the Steam Deck. The short version is that most of the basic functionality works, but the back paddles need a PS5 to configure, and the adaptive triggers just don't work without a workaround. On a Windows PC, you can use the DSX for Steam to configure the back paddles without a PS5. It also allows the adaptive triggers to work and gives you control to adjust the lights on this Pro pad. On Steam Deck, however, we're likely going to have to wait for Valve to fix this via Steam input, but they're usually pretty fast about this, so if you're only getting a DualSense Edge for Steam Deck, you may want to wait on that. One more story for today is an update on the video I made a few weeks ago about a site selling Steam Decks and how JSAUX got caught up in that thanks to a bad retweet. If you recall, this was a site selling supposedly brand new Steam Decks at a discount, so they were even cheaper than buying on Steam. Gaming on Linux did a comprehensive video covering all of the things that look shady about this site, and Valve ended up speaking on this too with the following tweet. They said, quote, "Hello and Happy New Year. A quick note that the only official ways to purchase Steam Deck are directly from Steam in the US, CA, EU, and UK, or from Komodo in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Steam Decks sold via any other websites or retailers are unofficial. Please be careful," end quote. There was a lot of talk in the comments of that post saying that this wouldn't be needed if Valve would just sell the Steam Deck in more regions, but I think the odd thing about this was that it had nothing to do with other regions. This site was trying to sell Steam Decks even in the UK at a discount, so something was obviously fishy either way. If you recall from that video, JSAUX retweeted one of the tweets from this site and then deleted the retweet later. The problem is they never sort of addressed it and just kind of acted like it never happened. In my video, I made it clear that I felt JSAUX should address it in a public statement and that I would communicate that to them. Well, I did, and so did Liam from Gaming on Linux, and thankfully they did issue a public apology. I really think they did the right thing here and addressed it the way it was supposed to be addressed. They are further addressing other concerns people had, including incorporating a cookie banner and pushing Shopify to further investigate why some users are getting unrelated spam emails. Altogether, I think JSAUX is showing that they're trying to do right by the community, and that's great news because their products have been consistently top shelf, and they are easily the best accessory maker dedicated to just Steam Deck products. On that note, they did send me a backplate, and I'm going to cover that as soon as I get a chance because I want to let you all know whether or not it's going to be worth opening your Steam Deck for one of these bad boys. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss that. Deck Gang out. Goodbye!